Oh, play the theme music again.
No, really?
Okay, all right, don't.
Do you want the theme music?
No, let's take a doodle poll. Theme music, clap. No theme music.
Airball.
The person slapped their leg again. All right, play the theme music if you can.
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 1351.PS13704, certificate number 40632, Lake Missoula.
So, I'm old enough to remember a time before the theory that the dinosaurs were killed by a giant meteor had even been posited, let alone widely accepted.
All my storybooks said it was an open question when I was a kid, because I'm also extremely old.
Yes, but I am older than you even.
And in yours it said, the dinosaurs may be extinct someday. And if they are...
Mine said, when Jesus rode his first dinosaur... I grew up in the... started school in the early 1970s, when all of the textbooks were still left over from trying to beat the Russians to the moon. So all of our textbooks were just like, here's...
How to compute low Earth orbit.
Yeah, it's Adam Freddy, who's here to tell you all about the power of the nuclear bomb. Under your desk, kids.
Yeah, duck and cover. You're not that old.
But at some point along the way, the scientific community began to advance the idea that the Yucatan Peninsula and the Gulf of Mexico are actually a giant crater formed when an enormous meteor hit the Earth, and the resultant cataclysm created an era of sunlessness that killed all the cold-blooded animals.
And there's evidence for this, right? There's a layer of iridium found at the right amount of 35 million years ago or whatever, almost worldwide, that seems to have extraterrestrial origin.
Right. And I think now we mostly live in a world where that is presumed to be the story, one of the stories of the Earth.
And that it's so well known that it can be a comic trope, in cartoons and stuff, there'll be dinosaurs seeing the comet coming.
Yeah, the famous New Yorker trope where where the
two dinosaurs are on a desert island.
Yeah, right.
And then the comet's coming.
I actually have a book of just Far Side cartoons with that premise. It's an entire book.
And the dinosaur says, on the internet, no one can tell you're a dog.
But throughout a certain portion of my childhood, this theory was greeted with incredible skepticism and ridicule.
By you?
No, I'm always an early adopter.
You embrace science.
I was like, that sounds better than the other theory.
Meteor? I'm going with that.
And, prior theories were that it was an era of volcanism and lots of volcanoes created this layer of smog.
It could still be sunlessness, but it could have been our own volcanoes.
Right, or that the decaying swamps created a methane cloud that blocked out the sun.
Or something killed their food source, right?
Yeah, right.
And I feel like these could be, multiple ones could be true to that. I've heard that the comet impact could be so bad that it could have started volcanic activity propagating through the other side of the Earth. Like, there might have been massive volcano eruptions from whatever is on the what do you call it? The antipode of the Yucatan, the opposite point.
Yeah, sure, the antipode of the Yucatan, that's what I call it.
That's the name of my prog band. And I love the first antipode of the Yucatan record, which is just called Antipode of the Yucatan, Roman numeral 1.
What is the difference between Roman numeral 1 and 1?
It seems more
More like an I?
it seems more Rush-like
Yeah.
to use Roman numerals.
Oh, I see what you mean.
It's steampunk. We're not using the cool numbers they have today.
Right.
We're going to go back in time for these old-timey numbers.
Actually, the cool numbers are the Arabic numbers.
Oh, man. Those are so cool.
They're way cooler. Anyway, we digress. But there are, and in fact, this theory that the comet started, disrupted the crust of the Earth enough that it created volcanic eruptions around the planet is something I still sort of ascribe to, because when I bought my house in Seattle, where we both live,
I'm interested to hear how this is evidence for this theory. What element of a home purchase?
I picked a house that was at an elevation and a location within Seattle that when the big one comes and creates, first of all, a disastrous 9.9 quake, followed by a city-destroying mega tsunami, followed by the eruption of Mount Rainier and the enormous superheated lahar
The mudslide.
that proceeds up the Duwamish River Basin.
That's what Tacoma deserves.
Then I know, there's a Tacoma person. Oh, you're right.
It's true. We suck.
All of that cataclysm will meet at the foot of the hill
your
that I
house.
live on, but I'm 700 feet up. And so I feel like when Seattle is just an archipelago of islands, I will be like pretty much the king of the Isle of Skyway.
So the apocalyptic event, the disaster that will precipitate the sealing up of the omnibus forever, is actually something you plan on watching from your front porch, sipping a Snapple.
Not from my front porch, from the windmill I build in my yard when my podcast dollars come rolling in. But that theory is a kind of global theory, but there are a lot of theories of the geology of the Earth that are more local. There are phenomenon all around that we still don't really have answers to what caused them even. Obviously ancient aliens played a big role.
Well, in the pyramids, but are you saying that the aliens also did natural formations like Mount Rushmore?
No.
Because it looks, how would they know what those presidents were going to look like? That's just erosion.
But they weren't there then. But the Sahara Desert used to be a sort of lush subtropical plain.
Right.
And there are a lot of suggestions of how the Gulf Stream changes over time, or the idea that I'm sure we're all familiar with the flipping magnetism of the Earth. These are theories that we have that there is evidence for, but there are competing theories.
The future people we're talking to don't know that at one time that head and a torch on the beach were just the top of a massive statue in New York Harbor.
That would be an amazing reference if that head and torch weren't going to be 600 feet under the water.
That's true.
Or 200 meters.
It is now canon that the Planet of the Apes movies take place in a domed undersea city to account for recent developments in climate change.
But there are a lot of things interesting about the land formations that make up the United States of America. And of course, once upon a great long ago, all of the land on Earth was part of a supercontinent called Gaia, and they separated
Pangea, right?
Pangea, right? And they separated out into the other continents that we know today. And these are all things that happened millions upon millions upon millions of years ago. But there are some confusing and unexplained things in our world today that happen more recently. And in our Pacific Northwest, the geology there is very interesting. The whole of eastern Washington and eastern Oregon is lava to a thickness of hundreds of feet that are a result of enormous prehistoric lava flows that came out of the mega volcano
Is it
of
the
Yellowstone.
supervolcano?
And that supervolcano erupted, in ancient history.
It's multiple times probably. That's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, but this lava is not, it's not like farmable. I don't know if you've ever tried to farm lava, but it's
I'm
not.
trying to picture
doesn't work.
what you would grow in lava.
It's it's resistant, right, to erosion.
Sure.
But in eastern Washington, there are also these very curious formations, which are enormous structures that look like ripples. the ripples that you would see on the beach when the tide goes out and you see the
in the
waves
sand.
do little ripples, or ripples at the bottom of a river. But these ripples are 50 feet high and sometimes 300 feet long and arranged over the course of miles. And it was extremely confusing to geologists in the 19th and early 20th century, because what could possibly explain these things? It's also very unusual there that when a glacier forms a valley, the glacier digs out a valley that is that's a U shape.
Right.
And when a river creates a valley, the river makes a V shape.
V-shape.
But in eastern Washington, there are enormous canyons which are U-shaped.
Like a square.
Absolutely
John
squared
just
off.
drew a square in the air, future listeners.
You're driving across eastern Washington, it just seems like an endless flat plain, and then you come to a lip, and it's a 300-foot drop.
It's like Minecraft.
Just straight to a valley floor, which is miles across, and then on the other side, another cliff.
Yeah, there's a place called it's Potholes. What's it called? Potholes something.
National
Cooley.
Monument, or
and it looks like a dry waterfall. Like you've essentially got farmland on all sides, and then it suddenly just drops off like a matte painting from a movie, and it goes down, 300, 500 feet to the valley floor, and there's no waterfall there.
Right. At all. It's not like a little stream even, it's dry. And it was sort of self-evident to geologists at the time that this was an example of the Columbia River having changed course. And at one point, the Columbia ran through here, and then it switched its way. The Columbia is an enormous river that runs through this whole region, twists and turns. But this being a river bottom did not explain this very strange square-shaped canyon. And in the early 20s, a man named J. Harlan Bretz, who was a kind of radical geologist, one of those radical geologists, theorized that, in fact, these geological formations had been caused by a catastrophic flood or multiple catastrophic floods, but that happened in recent time. And by recent time, I mean
how recent?
13,000, 15,000 years ago.
End of the last ice age, more or less.
Right, but certainly within the time of modern humans.
Yeah.
And
is this controversial? Like, it almost sounds like some throwback to, some youth pastor saying, all the dinosaur bones come from the flood, right?
Right, and it was incredibly controversial. He was drummed out of the Rebel Geology Society.
Wow, even the Rebel Geology Society.
He was too radical, and he spent many years trying to demonstrate his theory, or trying to prove his theory. And his theory was that as the ice sheet that had covered all of Canada and portions of North America retreated, it left behind an ice dam, which all I can do is make a reference to Game of Thrones, because that's what everyone is thinking. To futurelings, the Game of Thrones was a...
They have their mom's HBO password.
Yeah, I suppose. It was a diversion that kept us from reading or interacting with our children. But
a giant wall of ice.
A giant wall of ice that was 9,000 feet thick, like a huge glacial sort of dam in a canyon that would have been like keeping this lake behind the Rocky Mountains.
Almost 2 miles front to back.
And that's
wider than Game of Thrones, by the way.
That's right.
Take that.
Right. Yeah, take that, zombie dragon. But the lake was 300 miles long. It was about half the size of Lake Michigan, bigger than a handful of the Great Lakes.
Yeah, it'd be like Erie and Ontario put together.
Yeah.
And was it long? It was like filling a valley, or
it filled not only that whole valley, but it went up, what are now river courses in every direction. I mean, it was an enormous lake behind a mountain range rather than a lake on a flat sort of Midwestern.
It would look like one of those southwestern lakes that are made when they dam a river, and you've got all these tentacles coming off of Lake Mead or
Lake Powell.
Lake Powell, for example.
But as the glaciers retreated because of climate change in the 13,000s, this dam burst in sort of in a very short order, burst all at once, and let loose this enormous 200-mile lake all at once.
what does that even look like? I mean, how fast is water going?
So water in that kind of volume is moving at about between 50 and 60 miles an hour. Just a wall, just a 4,000 foot tall wall of water moving 60 miles an hour across.
It's Lake Michigan coming at you at the speed of a car.
Yeah. And what it did was effectively scoured all of the earth, 50 cubic miles of dirt. It just scoured it off of all of eastern Washington and down into eastern Oregon and out the mouth of the Columbia, creating a real fertile sort of plain. Or it made the area around Portland a really nice farmland.
So all of Portland's microbreweries or whatever, it's all grown with stolen topsoil.
Once again, another reason to despise Portland. They stole all of our dirt. And this happened repeatedly because that ice dam would then freeze and another lake would form, not the same size, but in another enormous lake, and then it would break.
And this is over a period of thousands of years.
Not thousands. It happened in a relatively short amount of geologic time.
So a few centuries later, the ice is back, and then
about
the lake backs up.
About 2,000 years, a series of about 40 of these cataclysms just kept wiping out whatever was there.
Every 50 years.
And taking everything, whatever like unlucky yak farmer sort of was like, nothing out here with his hawk here and his yak. And he was just like, this seems like a good place to build a yurt. And then.
And he probably knows. He's like, now there's been a giant mega flood here every 50 years for the last 1900 years. But what are the odds that it would happen again? It's like the ultimate gambler's fallacy.
Yeah. And I'm sure that there were, there was probably some, because human beings entered the continental United States about 8,000 years ago.
Yes, that sounds right.
8 or 9,000 years ago.
So there would have been no yurts in the way. It just would have been mastodons getting
this would have been
away.
Just prior to human habitation. And so it would have been, an awful lot of really pissed off saber-toothed tigers who just naturally don't like water.
Not again!
But it created these incredible sort of geologic formations. And our man, J. Harlan Bretz, was trying to convince the world geological community that this was, that his theory was correct, right? This is what all scientists are trying to do with their crazy ass theories, like my crazy ass theory that Twitter sucks now. But he would go to these conferences and just get shouted down and booed, and tomatoes were thrown at him and so forth. Because I don't know if you know this, but they sell tomatoes at geologic
just in
conferences.
case somebody advances a theory that's a little too out there.
That's right. Here we go.
They don't throw rocks. That would be too on the nose. And painful if it would landed on the nose.
That's right. They throw sandstone, so it kind of.
Yeah, they throw mica. They throw the softest rocks imaginable. Here's some talc.
And he actually had a friend named J.T. Pardee who agreed with him and would go to these events and supported him, but he actually worked for the U.S. Geological Survey, and so he had to professionally recuse himself from commenting one way or the other because he was like under contract. Sort of like any scientist or geologist working for the United States government now would have to deny any knowledge of...
Here are some words you can't say. Lake Missoula, ice dam, abortion.
And by the late 20s, he had compiled enough information and enough evidence that it began to be accepted. And when you see these formations, and I highly recommend everyone at one point or another take a trip, Eastern Washington doesn't sound like a destination resort, and for good reason. It is, it's one of the American shitholes. But these formations are fantastic to see. I mean, overwhelming.
And that's how Bretz had the theory. He had seen these in person, and he was trying to persuade people who had not been there. And I've read that he was able to persuade some of his former opponents by actually showing them the coulees, the dry canyons, the dry waterfalls, the scablands, and people would be converted by actually seeing the scale of them in person.
And you can imagine the light bulb going off in his head, probably standing at the beach and watching those, watching the ripples of the tide going out and realizing that those formations looked exactly the same.
It's like Isaac Newton if he'd gone to the beach instead of
right
gone to
instead
pick
of
apples.
gone to the apple tree. And the thing is that they're both regular and irregular, right? They aren't symmetrical or constant, but there is this regularity to them that's because of the hydrology of the way the waves form at that velocity.
And Lake Missoula is the name given to the former lake that only existed when this ice dam filled up a bunch of river valleys, right?
Right, and so we talk about that area, I guess, and it's the Missoula River now and the Clark River, which goes into the
So Montana, is that what we're talking?
Montana. Yeah,
I've been to Missoula, Montana. It's very nice.
it's very nice.
It
like
flooded eastern
Asheville.
Washington, which is great.
It's like Asheville, North Carolina, or Athens, Georgia.
It's like the college town in a place where people are a little suspicious of college towns.
Yeah, right. It's the one place in the state where people ride bicycles.
Instead of yaks.
But once this theory was accepted, people started to see these formations in other places around the world. And one of the places where these geological forms are also present is Tuva.
Wait, is that true?
Yeah.
Tuva, the home of the world famous Tuvan throat singers.
Tuva, home of the throat singers, is also one of the few places where there are these giant earthen ripples.
And it was because there were also frozen lakes in Siberia that just gushed south into Tuva.
That's right.
That's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
And that concludes Lake Missoula, entry 1351.PS13704, certificate number 40632 in the omnibus. Well, that's 2 shows, you guys. Thank you for your patience.
We do have a little bit of time that we reserved for questions because we know that people want to ask questions.
Some of you are fans of John Roderick and don't know that I was on a game show your grandmother probably loves. Maybe some of you are fans of mine and don't know about John's illustrious music career.
I discourage you from mentioning Jeopardy.
It's in my writer. You're not allowed to mention Jeopardy, in fact.
Ken will storm off the stage, at which point I will vomit and the show will be over.
I only answer questions about the Match Game 78. That's my real game show expertise.
Yes, sir.
Are there any instances of in Western popular music of people who employ the Tuvan
The polyphony?
Good.
I have never heard it.
It feels very Bjorky, doesn't it? Like something that she would have figured out and
So I think we can say for a fact that if Bjork has never done it, no Western singer has done it.
unlikely.
She would be the first, for sure, right?
Right. It seems like something that Werner Herzog would know how to do, but that's a different genre of art.
I mean, it's a kind of buzz you get in your throat. Like, it's, what was that 70s board game where they said 5 seconds to learn and a lifetime to master? I mean, I'm sure there are places on records where people doing kind of a guttural thing in their throat, you can hear that kind of a buzzy thing start, but they haven't really gone whole hog with it the way Anna Maria Hefele and the tribesmen of Tuva have.
Right. I mean, I think that it's a genre that is open to being exploited.
Maybe the waveform of the Tuvan throat singers, the fundamental note there, actually matches the ripples of their ice dam carved terrain.
There is a lot of music now where the vocal theatrics or acrobatics are pretty novel, right? I mean, even someone like Tune-Yards creates a lot of different sounds with her voice than you would have heard 10 years ago.
If anybody tries it, they just auto-tune it away now.
Yeah, that's the problem.
You just press the non-Tuva button. Untuva this by 15%, someone will say.
Yes, hello.
Did you get a cat?
We were talking about Vito earlier tonight, and come to find out that Vito, a cat that I considered adopting to live in my barn and kill rats, Vito viciously mauled the woman who rescued him and was housing him because she committed the unspeakable crime of petting him. And
Why does she want to get rid of this cat?
yeah, he gave her 40 stitches or something in her face. And that doesn't dissuade me from owning Vito. I feel like we would come to an agreement pretty fast because I also have very sharp claws. But I have a 6.5-year-old daughter and I feel like Vito would be an attractive nuisance. Also, some of the things that I thought were rats living in my attic are actually bats living in my attic. And bats are a protected species nationwide, and you cannot kill a bat in America. So I do not want to invite I don't want to invite that guy.
Baticide.
Yeah, the
Patricide.
Environmental Protection Agency guy from Ghostbusters to come. Yeah, because my vicious child-killing cat has a bat in its mouth. So I ended up not adopting Vito,
You had to veto.
but I still think about him. Yes, there in the middle.
Yes, I think you mentioned that the episode numbers and certificate numbers are not meaningless.
Yes, I did mention
Well,
that.
to you, probably.
I mentioned that to everyone in the room.
They're meaningful
an
to
hour
us.
ago, but yes.
Where do they come from?
Aha! From the mind of Ken Jennings.
I have a very consistent and intuitive, I feel, cataloging system that I use to organize the entries in the omnibus. In my opinion, it's far too intuitive and self-evident to go into here. I don't want to waste everyone's
Like
time
a lot
on
of
that.
code makers and code lovers and code breakers, Ken thinks it's so obvious. And I'm sure if we set that woman in San Francisco, here in San Francisco, who broke the Zodiac killer's code
Right.
when it was in the newspaper, if she took a whack at it,
Maybe San Francisco doesn't want to hear about tricky codes dreamed up by a devilish mystery man, you know. A little too soon for you guys.
I don't know about devilish mystery man, but okay. So we leave it to you.
Exercise to the audience.
Also, there are not running gags within the podcast, but there are overarching themes and un-overarching themes.
Wait, what's an like an underarching
Not
theme?
an un-un, an un-an, un-overarching theme.
Hold on, is this two things? Is there an overarching theme and something else?
And an uber-arching theme and an underarching theme. Unterarching theme.